In our last video, we had a look at 6 basic techniques for pencil crayons. And in this video, we're going to have a look at how we can apply them to a really basic picture and just see them in the context of a drawing. So let's get started. I'm going to keep my last page here just as a note to refer back to. And we're going to start with a pencil and just draw out our picture before we start coloring it in. So this is a super simple picture. And what we're going to do first is just draw a line across the top of our page, about 2/3 of the way up. You don't need to use the ruler if you don't want to. And from this horizon line, on the left-hand side of the page, we're going to draw an S shape. That's going to be more like a wavy pattern. Okay, so if you're thinking of an S and you just draw a wavy pattern, and by the time you get to the bottom, it should go off the edge of your page. We're going to draw one on the other side, and it should be the opposite. Okay, it doesn't matter if the curves don't necessarily match, and actually it looks better if they don't, but we want it to come out in the other direction. And as you go down your page, let it come out further and further. Okay, so it should be wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. And now that we've got these lines that are curved, we're going to draw vertical lines. So from this top curve, we're going to draw a vertical line going down, and you can stop just short of the next curve that comes out, and we're going to do that on the other side. Right, and then we're going to copy the curve that's above it. So from the bottom of this one, I'm going to curve in. From the bottom of this one, I'm going to curve in. Okay, then the next part that comes out, I'm going to draw a vertical line going down again, and then copy the shape that's above it. And then for my third and final one, I'm just going to let this one go off my page. But if yours doesn't go off your page, you would again follow the curve along the bottom. On the other side, the first one or the next one that comes out, we'll draw a line going down. Now again, you don't necessarily have to match up the sides, so it doesn't matter if each side is a bit different. And we're going to curve in. And then from this one, my line's going off the page, but if yours doesn't, just follow the curve off the page. Okay, and what we are actually drawing here is a cliff face. I'm going to draw a little bridge going across it, and we need some water. So about halfway down the cliffs at the top, we're going to draw a line going straight across. That's going to be the horizon of our water. And this line that I drew across the page, I'm just going to erase. Okay, and then at my second curve, which will probably be around halfway down your page, we're just going to draw a rectangle. This is going to be a little footpath bridge that goes across our cliffs. And you can rub out anything that's inside this rectangle, any of the lines. Okay, I'm going to make a little shadow or plank to make it look three-dimensional from these three corners, 1, 2, 3. Just drawing a little line coming out at an angle, and then we're joining those lines together. So I'm joining these two bottom lines together and this one over here. And then from this little plank bridge, we're going to have a path that's again curving. So similar lines to the lines that we did for the little cliff face. Nice curving lines. You can make them slightly different on each side. Okay, so that's going to be our little path. Our drawing is complete, and now we can get started with our colouring in. So the first colouring technique that we looked at in the last video was called hatching, and I said that that works really well for water. So we're going to have water in the middle of our canyon here, and we're going to use a hatching technique to colour this in. And what I'm going to do is start with some dark blue shading, and these are all horizontal lines. So it's going to look like a nice still river. Okay, you're going to have to do a couple of vertical lines just to get the colouring nice and clean around the edges. But as long as most of the colouring is vertical lines, it's going to make people think of a nice flat little river. Doing darker shading at the horizon and letting that shading get lighter as we come down, it makes it look like that is further away, and as it gets lighter, it gets closer. So if you want something to look further away when you're colouring in, you need to make it darker. If you want something to look a little bit closer, you need to make it lighter. Okay, I'm just doing a little bit of dark here because our bridge will make a shadow on the water. And as I'm coming down, I'm slowly reducing the pressure on my pencil crayon, so it helps me to press lighter. You can also do those lines slightly further apart. Okay, again, a couple of vertical lines that help you neaten up your shading, and your edges are not going to ruin the picture. You can see how I'm going over in areas several times to even out the colouring. You might find once you do your shading at the bottom, it's a bit too dark, so you need to go back and darken that area at the top again. Okay, another thing to consider when you're doing your shading is where is the light coming from. So if we just say the light is coming from this top right-hand corner, it means that the light's going to shine over this cliff, and this cliff is going to make a shadow on the right-hand side. So if you wanted to, you could darken your shading on this right-hand side. By adding shading and considering the light and the shadow, you're going to make something look more three-dimensional. So I'm just adding a little bit of hatching that's a bit darker. If you did cross-hatching or scrambling in this shading, it would make the waters look really rough. So maybe if you were doing a raging river, you would want to use that kind of shading rather than hatching. Okay, if you wanted to, you could add another color in here, so a light blue or even a green if you wanted to make it a little bit more of a green river. I'm going to just add a little bit of light blue, or you could leave it as white. A little bit of white shading on a river also looks fine. So I'm adding a bit of light blue into mine, but you don't need to if you don't want to. Right, now for our cliffs, we want them to look really tall and high. So instead of using horizontal lines, we're going to use vertical lines, and that's also going to change the appearance of something. So we're using a hatching technique to make the river and the side of the cliffs look different. So for this, I'm going to start with a brown, and I'm going to do vertical hatching. So lines going up and down. Again, around the edges, you can't always do the hatching perfectly. As long as the majority of it is coloured in with these vertical lines, it's going to make people think of these really tall, high cliffs. Now the cliffs that are a little bit further away in the background will be darker. And as we get to these cliffs near the front, we should do a little bit less shading so that we can make the cliffs lighter. Another thing you'll notice that I'm doing is on this first line of the cliff, I've made it slightly darker and I'm lightening it. And that's also just going to give it a little bit of dimension. So it will show you in this stretch of cliff, that's the furthest away and that's closer. So it's just another way to add dimension to a picture using your shading. Which side of the cliff is further, make that side darker. Okay, if you have a lighter brown, go over that with the lighter brown. Again, we are still just colouring with these vertical lines to keep giving people the impression of a tall cliff. If you have another gold or light brown colour, you could use that. Even a little bit of black could also work. So you can just keep layering it up. Grey would also work. So the more colours you use on it, the richer it will appear, or the richer the colour will appear. The next thing that we're going to colour in is this bridge. So for the bridge, I wanted to create a wood grain effect. And to do that, we're going to first draw some wood-like patterns on the plank and then colour over it with a lighter brown. So what I'm going to do is start with a swirl and then let that swirl go off. And now I'm just going around that shape that I've already drawn. Now because this is just one plank of wood, it's not going to have a whole lot of knots, which is what the swirl is. But if you wanted to, you could maybe do another one on there. Don't do too many, else it can start to look a little bit fake. Okay, so I've done a couple of lines representing the grain of the wood. And this little plank bit that we drew lines coming out the sides and the bottom. I'm going to colour those in darker because they will be in shadow. So it makes it look like a three-dimensional plank of wood. Now the last thing that we're going to do is just do a little bit of light colouring with the brown. And what that's going to do is just help the light brown and the dark brown blend together, because we don't want this wood grain to show up really easily, else it's going to look unnatural. So if it just is a little bit of the wood grain showing through, it will look a lot more natural. You can see that we could just leave it like this as one layer of colour, but again, if you add more colours to it, you're going to make it look richer. Okay, so I'm going over it with my light brown. I'm pressing fairly hard. Now we can see the layers of colour coming through. Another technique that we looked at in the last video was something called stippling. So what we're going to do for our path to show that it's a little gravel path is some stippling. But before we do our stippling, we're going to add just a touch of shading to it. So I'm going to use my light brown. I have it out already. And there's going to be a bit of a shadow from the plank of wood. We're slowly pressing lighter here. And then on the edges of the path, there'll be a little bit of a shadow. So on the edge of the path, I'm doing some darker coloring and I'm lightening it up. Now I'm trying to make this coloring as smooth as I can. So I'm just using the side of my pencil crayon. You can see how low I've got it on the page, and I'm holding my pencil quite high up so that I don't press too hard. Slightly darker around the edges and lighten it up as you get to the middle. Another thing that will help you to make a blending look a little smoother is just rub over it with your finger or a piece of tissue paper, and it will make it instantly look smoother. Right, so I'm going to go on to the other side now. Right, so now we're going to do some stippling over this. Because I've got my light brown in my hand, I'm just going to start with that. Right, next I'm going to come with my dark brown. I want to make it a little bit darker around the plank and along the bottom part of my path. So I'm going to make sure that I do more of the dark brown stippling in those areas. Okay, I'm just adding a little bit of this dark brown shading onto my path. And you can keep layering that with colors. You could use black, yellows, oranges. They're all in the same color family as the brown. So they'll all blend in. And the more colors you add, the richer and deeper the colors are going to look. So for our next technique, we're going to be doing cross hatching. We're going to use this to color in the grass. So for this, you're going to need your light green and your dark green. Right, so we're just going to start on this horizon line, again with our darkest color, and do our scribbling technique. You want to be pressing quite hard and making these lines fairly close together. And I'm letting some of my little scribbles come above my horizon line. And that's just going to make people think of rolling fields or lots of grass. As I come down, I'm pressing lighter. Almost with each line of coloring that I'm doing, I'm just pressing slightly lighter. Under this path, I'm just doing a little bit of darker shading just to show the difference between the two. Then I continue with my lighter shading. I'm making an effort to make my lines further apart, and I'm pressing lighter. You can also see that as I'm getting closer to the front of my page, the part that's closest to us, I'm making my scribbles bigger. So this is another trick to make things look further away or closer. The closer something is, the larger it will be, and the further away it is, the smaller it will be. And that can even be true for the shading. Okay, once we've finished with our dark green, we're going to move on to our light green. Because the dark green is a darker color, we can press quite a lot harder with our light green, and it will just fill in the spots that we missed with our dark green. If you have a few spots where there's white showing through, you could leave it like that, as it's a bit of light catching the grass, or you could color over it with your yellow pencil crayon. And because yellow is part of the same color family as green, yellow and blue make green, you know that these colors are going to blend into each other easily. So a quick way to check that is if they are next to each other in the color wheel, they're going to blend together really easily. And if they are not next to each other, if there's just one color between them, you need to maybe try and use that color to help blend the two colors together. If they are opposite each other on the color wheel, you're going to have a really hard time blending them together. Although colors that are opposite each other can look really nice next to each other, it can be really tricky to blend those colors together. Okay, so yellow just goes into green really easily. And again, it just adds to the depth of the color. So some people might just leave their page green like this, but by adding the lighter green and the yellow, you can see how you can create a much richer, warmer color. Right, to finish our picture off, we're just going to do a little bit of smooth shading to create the sky. And for that, I'm using my light blue. And I've got it sharpened quite nicely. It hasn't got a sharp point, but it's got a lot of the actual color showing. So I can hold my pencil on the side and press really lightly, and there's not going to really be pencil lines or pencil crayon lines that show up. And again, on that horizon, I'm going to press a little harder, and as it comes up, I'll just press lighter and lighter. You can see I keep coming back here and working from dark to light, so you've got to go over it a couple of times to get it the way that you like it to look. Then something that will help them blend together is just rubbing over it with your finger. If you've pressed too hard, the rubbing's not going to do anything. But if you have pressed really softly, the rubbing will help to blend the colors together. So I hope you have a better understanding of these pencil crayon techniques and how to apply them to a picture. If you enjoyed my video, please hit the like button, and why not subscribe to our channel? We put up new videos every week.